Welcome. We got recording going. Hold on one second. I'm having some trouble with my own volume. Can someone talk for me?
How's this, Shane? Better?
No. There we go. Okay.
Got it?
Yeah.
All right, awesome.
Cool. Everybody. Thanks for joining this morning. Glad to see all these new faces, to be honest. And I got spotlighted. Wonderful. My name's Shane Rogers. I'm the communication director at Food Solutions New England. If you all aren't familiar with Food Solutions New England, I'm going to put the link in the chat, but we're a 6-state network, really dedicated to the values of democratic empowerment, racial equity and dignity for all, trust and sustainability, and really working to bring together the food system throughout New England around those values and to really pursue what we call the New England food vision. So with that being said, I am very excited to be here today to talk to you about advancing narrative strategically and collectively. This is something that I spend a lot of time thinking about and trying to practice. And I am also excited to be here co-presenting this with Darcy. So with that being said, I am going to share my screen and we are going to get started. Cool. So for our time today together, we have an hour and a half. We're going to do some introductions real quick in the chat. We're going to go over moving from narrative to framing. We're going to talk about strategic collective communications. And then we're going to do some share out questions and feedback. Throughout this whole process, the real goal is for folks to gain some skills, whether those are new or whether you're honing them, and for us to start thinking about communications in a little bit of a different way. So there will be plenty of time for questions and feedback throughout the whole presentation, and lots of times for us to flex some of these muscles that I think, as we go through it, you're going to see that you're already doing as well, and we just need to keep practicing. So, Darcy, I'll let you introduce yourself first if you would like, as I'm sure most people know you, though, on this call, more in some realm, but I don't want to presume.
Sure, yeah. I introduced myself in the big room, but again, I'm the state coordinator for the main network of community food councils. We're one of the Food Convergence partners, and I'm also an avid cook and gardener, and I'm super happy to be here having this conversation with everybody.
Awesome. And like I said, my name's Shane Rogers. In addition to working for FS&E, consider myself a community organizer, a wild food enthusiast, and just among many other hobbies and fun things to do throughout New England. I am currently beaming into you all from Milton, Vermont, which is just north of Burlington, but do have a very big soft spot for Maine in my heart. Just having spent some time driving through it and visiting various places. So always open for recommendations as well. So please feel free to drop those in the chat for someone who enjoys camping, hiking, and all the likes. Just to kick us off, I was wondering if folks, let's see, we have about 15 people. So I'm going to take us off a screen share here. I'm wondering if folks either in the chat or want to pop off, mute, want to share who and what to share what's springing for you. That can be work-wise, that can be personally, that can be really any interpretation that you want. And Becca, I'm actually going to take us off a spotlight just because I think the screen share should pop up for spotlight, and every time we come off, I would love to see people's faces or boxes depending on how they're feeling. So what's springing for everybody? Feel free to also introduce yourself further if you'd like, maybe who you're with, what your relation is to communication or narrative, if you would like to. Any brave souls want to come off mute?
Hi, everyone. I can dive in and start. My name is Lena Beth Schneider. I live in Biddeford, Maine. And I'm not here as a food systems person. I'm very new to this world. I'm a former professional baker at Scratch Baking Company, if you guys know it, in South Portland, and current communications consultant. And so this panel, or I guess not panel, this session really piqued my interest because I'm doing some brand and communications work for Southern Maine Bakers for a Cause, which is a group that I'm a founding member of, but also kind of helping with our rebranding, which we're doing right now. So that's a little bit about me. I'm really curious about the people who are here from the food systems world, because it's not a background that I have. And thank you so much for hosting this today. I'm really excited.
Awesome, thank you. Anybody else? You could also drop it in the chat too, if you would like.
I'm happy to share. I'm calling in right now from Jackson, Wyoming, but am from Massachusetts, born and raised, and I'm very much thinking about moving back to the Portland area in the next season or two. But I'm working for a company called Vertical Harvest Farm, and we are, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the big building going up in Westbrook, but that is our indoor greenhouse that we are building. And a huge part of our mission is to provide nutritious food to the community, really the local community, and especially those that are underserved and need food the most. And my position in Jackson has been as a sales manager, but I'm really moving into the world of strategic partnership. Who do we want to work with? Who do we want to partner with? How do we kind of collaborate and solve some of these food issues together? And I have a lot to learn in this space and a lot to learn about the state. So thank you for having me. Thank you for sharing all of this.
Awesome. Well, folks, if you want to continue to introduce yourselves in the chat, please feel free to go ahead. We're going to start off with some grounding here, though. So again, I'm going to be asking you all to come off and mute as you feel comfortable. Also utilize the chat as much as you want, and I'll be reading them out. But the first question I want to start off with here is, what do you all think of when you hear the term narrative? There's no right or wrong answer. I guess unless it's like really off the wall, then maybe that would be a wrong answer, but.
Story.
Story, yep, good.
Perspective.
Perspective, thank you, I like that.
I think of connected events, just sort of different elements that are pulled together into a story.
Yeah,
Yes,
to build off
connected
that,
events.
like
Yeah,
an
go ahead.
anecdote, similar. Like that's exactly what I was thinking, Anna Maria. Yeah.
Anecdote, we have stories, sometimes shared or transmitted. Story, connection, perspective. Awesome. So what about the term framing? What do you all think of when you hear the term frame or framing as it relates to communications or these stories?
What parts of a story or perspective and you want to tell and how you want to tell it. So literally even the word frame, right? If you have this huge map, you can take that frame, you can do it here, you can do it here, you can do it here, or you could pull pieces together to put it in that frame just to make a visual.
Yeah, love that visual. We have Becca, the lens we use to tell a story. Any other thoughts?
Would you consider
folks?
like the tone of the story to be included in framing?
I think so, yeah. The context as well, right?
I think of choices. I think you have to decide kind of how you're going to present something. So it brings up the idea of choices.
Yeah, I really like that. Audience, Sam, that goes right into that choice, right? And then how do these two ideas kind of as you see them, how do they interplay within your communications work or your other work as well? It doesn't necessarily have to be communications related, but how do you see these two interacting, these two concepts?
I'm not just tech. I actually chose to be here, Shane. So I know I'm in a public health world, and one way that those interplay is like the historically, like the PSA style is not like asset based framing, and we're really working on like flipping the message of how we share and how we bring people in. So that's how those are coming together for me, of like how do we flip it around and talk about what the strengths are, and what people are doing and what they are excited about rather than what's going wrong.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah,
Any
a
other
way that
thoughts,
helps.
Darcy?
Yeah, a way that I think of it that's helpful for me is like the narrative is the what and the framing is the how. So what am I trying to convey? And then what, tone and lens, whatever am I going to convey it through to reach the audience that I hope to reach?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think both will work together because you have to really think from the perspective of what is your audience going to walk away with, and you need both as tools to help distill and synthesize the sort of messages and the feelings, right? And we're working constantly in a really saturated communications world, and I find that you really have to work with both to really get to the heart of both the information, but especially the feeling you want people to walk away with, because they're already, again, saturated. And so how do you have them walk away with anything, really?
Yeah. And we're saturated, right? We have so many things pulling at us at all times. You need to get this out. You need to lift this up. What about this? What about this? And I don't know about you all, but I am a communication shop of one at Food Solutions New England. Most of the folks that I work with are maybe a communication shop of half, 2, 3 tops. So yeah, this is how we get to strategy, right? This is how we get to making sure that we're grounding ourselves in those values that we hold up. So what is narrative, right? I said there was no right or wrong answers because it is interpretive, but for this presentation, I want us to think about narrative as this idea that a narrative reflects a shared interpretation of how the world works. That's from the Narrative Institute. So we can all hold a narrative together. I think there's a reason why you're all on this call. We probably hold similar narratives about the work that we do, the way that we see the world, how we think the world should function. And what is framing? A frame, like you all said, is this guide. It directs people where to look, but more importantly, helps them interpret what they see. So every message, whether written, spoken, illustrated, or signed, is presented through a frame of some kind. Simply put, every communication is framed. So this is our message, right? This is exactly what you all said. It's how we're choosing, what we're choosing to lift up, how we're choosing to lift up. What are we doing strategically to reach those goals that we all set out for ourselves, whether that's as a business, a consultant, a nonprofit, or what have you? Again, the frame is going to help us achieve that shared interpretation of the world, that narrative that we are holding as an organization or as an individual. Now, the question is, how do we move from narrative into framing? Because I know for me, so oftentimes you get these narratives, or you're in this place and you're like, yes, I agree with this. This is amazing. This is what I want to be doing. This is what I want to be talking about. But then the reality sets into our work. The reality sets in that maybe we're only getting paid for 40 hours a week, that we have 7 events that we want to lift up, that we're supposed to be posting on social media, creating a newsletter. We're supposed to be doing this, this, and that. And all of a sudden, what gets lost is that greater context, that shared interpretation, because we aren't able to give ourselves the time based off of what society is dictating to think about moving from narrative to framing. We aren't able to layer on our narratives all the time because we are more concerned, because of what the world tells us, that we just need to get it out. We need to get more likes. We need to get people to attend the events. So before though we get here, I want to really recognize that there are a ton of resources out there around narrative and around framing. The one thing that I've found though is that most of these resources don't tell you how to implement them, right? They give you really good words to use when you're talking about something, or they give you really good ideas. But our goal today is to really move from how do we take those ideas and those words and actually apply it to the shit that you have to get done, that you need to lift up in your world and your work at the same time, while also still participating in lifting up the shared interpretation of the world. So some of these narratives, right, are going to be like the strategic collective narrative, which we're going to use today, which will really give you aspirational interpretations of how the world works. And others are going to be like the frameworks reframing farming, which is a bunch of strategies for expanding and thinking about agriculture, which I'm going to put in the chat if y'all aren't familiar with it. And that's going to give you a lot of great ways to think about how to talk about farming to different audiences. And there are going to be others that are similar to that, such as the FS&E's A New Narrative for a New England Food Vision. Again, a lot of great ways of how to talk to people, how to use language that's going to resonate with your audience. And one of my favorites also that I want to give is the race class narrative, because it does a really good job at holding onto a narrative, a larger interpretation of the world, while also giving you the data about the audiences that you're going to be reaching, and why it's important to fold these in. So if you all haven't had a chance or you haven't stumbled upon these, I would highly recommend taking some time to look through those resources and then applying what we are hopefully walking away with today, to putting those to use in your work. So to begin, we need to know what the parts of a narrative are. And of course, when you are looking at these resources, they are not necessarily going to be laid out like this, but I guarantee you that if you were to take this framework and apply it to any narrative resources, you would be able to pull out these 5 elements of a narrative that you're going to see. So when you're looking at narratives or interrogating the ones in your own work, you're going to find that effective narrative is made up of 5 different parts. You have your people or your audiences, your goals, your obstacles, your solutions, and your call to actions. Now, like I said, not all resources are going to lay things out like this, but these 5 elements are going to give you something tangible to ground in and really help you distill what can feel like large and confusing at times. Some of these narratives that you like dive into, they're just huge interpretations of the world. But when we're thinking again about how we're going to fit this into a 40-hour work week, this is going to help you ground into some tangible ways to break it down and to find some bite-sized chunks for you to run with. And while what we're going to be practicing today is going to very explicitly include all 5 of these parts, as you get more comfortable and utilize narratives more effectively and efficiently in your day-to-day, these elements are really going to become a part of the background, with some of the parts of the narrative being implied or not necessarily explicitly stated in the framing that they produce. So you'll see that when we start getting to creating some framing and some messaging, we're going to ask you to use all 5 elements very explicitly, but not always everything has a large enough like box for you to fill that in. So this is just a thing that's going to continue to take practice, and you're going to be able to see just how this can be shaped to fit the needs that are popping up for your organization and for your work. So the first two that we're going to focus on are our audience and our call to actions. An audience is any group of people that you've identified as important to communicate with to reach your goals. So this can be everything from funders to lawmakers to environmentally conscious Mainers to food service professionals. And you can really dive in and out as deep as you want. The one thing to always remember with your audience is you can't talk to everybody all the time, because what's going to end up happening is you're not going to be able to reach anyone. And your call to action is what you're really asking people to do. So this can be something as explicit as sign this petition or donate or attend this event, but it can also be things like learn about this topic, tell a friend, check out this resource. So when we're thinking about call to actions, we don't always or necessarily need to be thinking about the metric of somebody showing up or like taking that action. And action can come in many different ways. And I encourage you all to think about that too as you continue to develop metrics for your own work. As we all know, people who are giving out grants and philanthropy tend to demand these numbers-based metrics for them to prove their worth of being able to fund communication goals. So to begin, I want to take 5 minutes for everybody to take 5 minutes. And I want you to think about your own work. And I want you to write down either on a piece of paper or on your computer 3 audiences that you would say interact with your work, or 3 audiences that you're thinking of for your work. And then I want you to think of 3 call to actions. And they could be something that maybe you're working on right now, or it can be something that perhaps you would like to be working on in the future, or something that's on your mind. Now, Darcy, I don't know, I don't want to put you on the spot, but do you have any examples of like main specific audiences that you've been working with that may help people before we dive into writing these down?
Ooh, well, I mean, for my role, it's a lot of times community food councils that I'm communicating with. So it's a lot of people who are like SNAP educators, people who work with land trusts, a lot of people who are working in the food systems arena or the land systems arena. That's a lot of our audience. But also, let's see, I've done a lot of political work. So that's, that you can kind of get more like hyper targeted, like I'm going to target Republicans in this district, or I'm going to target, Democratic voters in this district who voted in the last 3 elections. So I don't know if any of you do political type work, that could be a way to think of different audiences. I don't know. Farmers,
I think that's super
fisher
helpful.
people.
Yeah. And so like when you all are thinking about your audiences, it doesn't just have to be like this amorphous funders, right? It can be Maine Food Council people. It can be anglers on the northern coast. So feel free to dive in like that. Feel free to get as specific as you want that makes sense for you. And we're going to come back at, let's say, 11:31. So again, 3 audiences and 3 call to actions that may relate to those audiences, or just 3 call to actions in general that you may be working on. Does anybody have any questions, or do we feel good? Sweet. So we'll get back here at 11:31. How was that for everyone? Good? Anybody want to share an audience, a call to action? Throw it in the chat too if you'd like.
I can kick us off.
Thanks, Darcy.
So one audience that we always try to connect with in my work is local farmers. And the call to action would be to get local farmers to connect with their local food councils.
Sweet. Love it. One more, anybody?
I can share.
Thanks,
An
Sam.
audience that I work with is food service professionals in both the healthcare and school settings. And our call to action is helping them or supporting them make the healthy choice the easy choice.
Nice. So just even right there, I want to lift up, your audiences are so different, right? We got farmers, we got food service professionals. I'm sure there are like policy makers on somebody's list. I am sure the whole entire thing runs the gamut. So my point being is that we are talking with a ton of disparate audiences, and as we get and continue to move through this, that is where the power of our collective nature lies, right? Because if we're using a shared narrative, which we're going to practice, if we're using a shared interpretation of events, I can rest assured that Darcy's talking to farmers, Sam's talking to food service professionals, Shane's talking to policy makers. We're all using our expertise to get to them, right? And they're all hearing a relatively same message, a shared narrative as we continue to move towards something that we are striving for collectively. So the next three elements of a narrative are our goals and our obstacles and our solutions. And these three elements are really what gives a narrative life, right? They are broad strokes, they're honest, they're kind of boundary pushing, they can be visionary, and they're wholly collective in nature, right? You have your individual audiences, you have your individual call to actions, but these goals, obstacles, and solutions are what we're all sharing when we subscribe to a shared narrative. So while you may see your individual or org-wide goals, obstacles, and solutions reflected when you find the right narrative, I really hope you all continue to remember that a narrative, again, is this shared interpretation of how the world works. And it is that collective where the power of the narrative lies. So how does this look when it's laid out? There's an example on the screen right now of the Northeast Food System Community of Practice Strategic Collective Narrative. And we're going to be using this in a little bit, so I'll give you a link here in a second. But as you can see, a narrative is not necessarily strictly defined, but rather a nest for you to hold your messaging in. And as we move from narrative to framing, you're going to be using the narrative more like a choose your own adventure to fit your individualized communication needs, to lean into your own expertise on knowing how to reach your audiences and to achieve your call to actions, and leaning in to lifting up this narrative at the same time. So before we move on, I want to be clear again that not all narrative resources you run into are really going to lay out these 5 elements like this. So it may take a little bit more work to tease out what the elements are for other resources, but I do promise you that they're going to be there. And especially if this is new to you, or even as you continue to practice, it's going to help you organize your thoughts as you pursue this work a little bit. So I'm going to drop the link to the strategic collective narrative in the chat here. And what I want you all to do is I just want you to take, again, 5 minutes to peruse it. And I want you to think or maybe make a note about anything that resonates for you, right? Anything that pops out to you that resonates with your work. You're going to see 4 narratives on there. And there's no way you're going to be able to take it all in. So just feel free to skim. But I also want you to see kind of how the goals and the obstacles and the solutions all work together, right? You have your goal of what you want to achieve. You have the obstacles that are identified that we're trying to overcome. And then you have solutions about the things that we want to see happen that we're trying to pursue. And I would venture out, I don't think it's too far of a guess to say that much of these are going to be things that you're all working on in some capacity, or at least you see elements of it. So again, let's take 5 minutes, or let's take 4 minutes. We'll go to 11:41 for you all to just kind of peruse this and make a few notes about things that maybe are popping out, or just kind of see what resonates. Are folks able to get access? Do you have any questions? Right on. So I'm going to throw up some music again, and I'll call you back in at 11:41.
And Shane, could you just put the definition you shared of narrative and framing in the chat again?
Absolutely.
Or
Yeah.
you did? Could you put it in there? Period. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Who was able to read all of that? Speed readers. I did not expect you all to read all of that, but how did that resonate when you're reading through some of it? Did you see some elements of your work? Yeah, Monique, I see you're off mute.
Oh, I don't actually.
Sorry.
Yes, no, you're okay. Yes, resonate in my work, but honestly, some of the things that I was focused on was how the message was delivered. And so that's kind of like the takeaways that I was really looking at. And I'll speak to that. I mean, it was super transparent and honest, even though there are some really difficult topics in there that could be maybe triggering for some folks. But at the end of the day, the way that it was really framed was very solution oriented, progressive, positive, productive. So I really appreciate that. You know, you're really getting to, there are all of these problems, but there are ways that we can start chipping away at this from real basic small steps going forward.
Yeah. And to give you all some background, this was created by a group of like 5 or 6 communicators here working in food systems in the Northeast. And it is just a compilation really of the narratives that we were lifting up and using in our work. Not exhaustive. There's still work being done on it. But the reason we're using it is because of how it is laid out. So if you didn't see stuff on it that you know is missing, rest assured, we will be talking about ways to get involved. Sherry, yeah.
Yeah, so this isn't what you're sharing widely. Is this like an internal document that you use to guide your communications? So when you're speaking about it, you're going to try to include the goal, the problem, the goal, the obstacles, and the solution, or maybe sometimes it'll just be the obstacles and solutions. But this is sort of like what you the building blocks that you want to make your outward communications made up of. Am I understanding that correctly? Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So let's go into that. I think that is our next step on this journey. So I appreciate you. We have all these blocks. We have our call to actions and our audiences. You familiarized yourself with, again, a collective narrative where this is a shared interpretation of the world. The fact that this resonated for some of you, you can take that and know that at least it is resonating for one other communicator in New England as well. And they're using that. So there is power right there in that collectivism. So how do we take this though? And how do we take our call to actions and our audiences and move it into actual messaging that is going to help us lift up this narrative without drowning out the very real things that we need to communicate to be able to secure funding, get people to show up to events, and name the list of all the things that we have to do. And that is where we come to this handy dandy worksheet. So this is a real life example of taking a call to action, an audience, and one of those narratives and turning it into messaging. So to just give you a quick run through of it, right? This example was potential grantees, folks, and community organizers. I always put Maine, so you could just see my affinity for Maine already in these pre-created worksheets. The call to action was to apply for a grassroots grant. And this was probably going to be on social media. From that collective narrative, I chose community engagement in climate action as a goal. The obstacle to that resonated was an immense imbalance of power that drives current agriculture practices in land use and access. And a solution is really leaning into local knowledge as expertise. So the message that came out of that is we know that local knowledge is expertise. We want to disrupt the imbalance of power, perpetuating the destructive current agriculture practices and disparity in land use and access. We need to ensure that local grassroots groups can access adequate resources to build just and resilient communities. Learn more about applying for grassroots grants at grants.com, which would be great if there was a website that we could just use for grants.com. But I lift up this example because, as I hope you all can see, I didn't explicitly name my audience, right? I didn't say, dear potential grantees. So once again, one element already implied, and you're using that through your channels. You're reaching them through your channels that you have established, that you've been cultivating over the months and years that you've been doing this work. And I leaned into trying to fold in seamlessly the narrative into that call to action. And this was a pretty long message, right? This is something that I would probably put in a newsletter. This would be something that maybe went on to LinkedIn or one of those other platforms. But this could also be as simple as folding in a word or two into a message, right? This could be as simple as saying that we know that local knowledge is expertise, and to combat climate change, we need to lift up community partners and get them funding, apply for a grant. And that practice is what is going to, that type of messaging is what's going to result from continuing to practice and thinking through these 5 elements. Your audience and your call to action is extremely personalized. Your goal, your obstacles, and your solutions, they get to be collective. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the impact of that collectiveness. But what I want to do is I want to give you all an opportunity to practice taking elements from that narrative that we shared, the strategic collective narrative that was developed, and laying it and layering on top of your audience and call to action to start flexing that muscle of creating framing that is a direct result of your narrative while still meeting your goals. So I am going to drop into the chat a link to this worksheet, and this will give you all the framework for doing this. I apologize that they're all in PDFs. Feel free to download them and use them as you will. And I will also, again, put into the chat the narrative elements that I put in earlier. And I would like to give you all, let's say 10 minutes, right? I'm going to give you all 10 minutes to take your call to actions and your audiences and to do a choose your own adventure with one of these narratives that resonates for you, and then produce messaging that simultaneously incorporates and reaches your individualized communication goals while layering on this collective shared interpretation of the world. Does this make sense? Do folks have questions?
Will you share your example as well?
Yeah, definitely. I have to go and find the link, but I will put that in the chat. And this might feel a little awkward. I'm not gonna lie, like it's not always easy to do this. So make it bulky, make it weird. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna come back and share some of them. So be prepared to either drop them in the chat or to lift them up. But again, we're flexing muscles here, and we're trying to really work towards moving away from this ego-driven, individualized communication to continuing to lift up that shared interpretation. So let's come back at 11:59. we'll do some share out, and then we're going to move into the next part of this presentation. And I will find that link and put it in the chat with the specific example on it. How was it? You feel okay? You got some good messaging? Some good framing? What about a thumbs up if that felt like a wasn't too difficult, or like you felt like you were getting into a groove? Got a thumbs up from Wendy, Sam, Lena, Monique, Sherry. Okay. Now my next question is, who wants to share? Anybody want to brave sharing a message? Sharing some framing?
I can.
Lovely.
Again, with the big old disclaimer that I'm not in the food systems world. So I picked an example that probably doesn't make sense, but it's an example. So my audience, this is something that I often come across in the communications work that I do. Normally, my audience is internal staff. I'll do internal communications for organizations. And so instead of having it be politicians or community members or what have you, it'll be a message from leadership to the actual staff of an organization. So that's what I went with this time. And I don't know if anyone else found this. I had to skip over the call to action to kind of ground myself and what was the goal, what was the obstacle at this particular time before I could think of what's a call to action I actually want to put out there. And so my obstacle was, I pulled this out of thin air, but I said a political PAC donated a lot of money to big ag and climate denial. It's all over the news and feel like a hit to our organization's work. And so for part of the solution, I said there's a multi-strategy solution, including, and this is what I'm focusing on, is a community day for action and awareness to support local farmers. And so that's the call to action, saying staff, you can come to this if you have capacity and want to. And I don't know if you want me to actually read the message, but I got a little draft.
Yeah, please,
Okay.
if you're willing.
Sure. So I did address it. This is in the format of an email, but it could be in a newsletter or whatever. So this is from an organization's CEO. And it says, "Dear staff, we know the news can weigh heavy on all of us. It has been personally discouraging to watch politicians openly deny climate change and to view the support their message has received. However, what has brought me comfort is seeing our community come together overnight to support our local farmers. As you may know, we will be hosting a community day with our partner XYZ organization to celebrate and raise funds for our local food systems. I hope you will consider joining us in community and attend this Saturday, May 20th, in this Together organization."
Lovely. So, Lena, to put you just on the spot for a second,
Sure.
you said you weren't part of the food system, so you didn't think this would make sense. But I guess being part of the food system, that makes perfect sense. And I'm wondering, how did you feel knowing that this was part of like a larger narrative, right? Because it sounds, I guess I should say, it sounds like something you probably would have sent anyway. But did you see the connection? Did you feel like you were making it more explicitly? Did it resonate for being able to use this with other narratives that you maybe will run across, or that you have kind of percolating on your back burner?
Yeah, I don't know if this is answering your question necessarily, but this is sort of a formula that I've unfortunately had to use many times. Before I was a baker, I worked in reproductive health care, and we constantly faced big political attacks. And so the message was always, we know what's happening. We want our staff to feel seen and heard. I didn't talk about the goal, but that was the goal of this particular message, was not only to get them to come out, but to recognize how they might be feeling with the news. And then, so framing it that way, and then inserting whatever call to action is there. I'm not sure if that's answering your question, but it feels very, very applicable no matter what the goal of the organization is, that when there's an obstacle, here's our solution.
Yeah, definitely. And I'll say, when I listen to it, like, I'm still hearing the like elements of those narratives too, right? Like big corporate runaway money being spent to do this. The goal and the solution was involvement from your staff to feel like you can make an impact in your small corner. And the goal overall is to have more community involvement. And that narrative, I think I see percolating out, whether and however that's going to be applied. Does anybody else want to lift up an example?
And I'd like to, mostly because I could use like support.
Yeah.
So I just to give context, I work with the St. Mary's Nutrition Center in Lewiston, and so we're like easiest way is kind of a multifaceted community food center, but actually my work also involves supporting our city farmers market, which we're stepping back. I'm on the board, so distinct from my role at the Nutrition Center, but the Nutrition Center has been integral in sort of supporting the market and becoming really robust and autonomous. And it's really its own entity now. But as the board, we're doing a sponsorship campaign because the market really does play a part in sort of the overall efforts to revitalize the downtown and the riverfront. And so anyway, so just trying to think of like how like sponsorship is connected to the like a larger community goal of like just making our city like livable and attractive, and also while supporting farmers and making a livelihood. And I feel like I might have just lost. I'm one of those people that has like 72 tabs open at once.
God.
So pardon me, because I might have just lost, let's see, the document I had open. Oh, here it is. Okay. So yeah, so I'm just like not, yeah. So just breaking down the spreadsheet, the audience we're trying to reach at this moment with this particular type of sponsorship is really local businesses and agencies. And I think the call to action is to sponsor the Lewiston Farmers Market. And the goal is a robust, dynamic farmers market that attracts people to the city and builds a vibrant riverfront and downtown while supporting local farmers and building their livelihood. So like a question I'll just put out there now is that, like, in this context, is that like way too big of a goal? That's like our meta goal. So I'm not sure if like in an activity like that. And then the obstacles are kind of, there's a bunch of them. Really, one is like farmers markets, like reliable, consistent support. There's kind of always a particular image of Lewiston, like I've been here almost 20 years, that we're constantly working against. That's often really not fair and often false. Farmers markets are niche. But one specific thing is we moved to a new location. That's a lot. And we're really working to improve it, both for us, but for the riverfront. And so it feels like the solution is a beautiful, attractive location and regular family friendly and engaging activities at that location. So I just wondered, like, just in the mapping of that, I didn't get as far as the messaging, but just in the mapping of it, does that make sense, I guess? Or am I missing a collective piece? That's what I'm trying to understand. Is there a lack of the collective? So I'm really interested in this concept of the shared narrative, because
I think one of the things that I heard in almost all of your examples of a goal or a solution or the obstacles is you almost created narrative, you almost created framing in all three of those already, because all of those tied back to a collective piece, right? If you want it, like, for the solution, for instance, was you said like a nice area for the Lewiston Farmers Market to be in the downtown, right? And for me, that sounds like that is a solution of utilizing public space for the betterment of having, healthy, locally sourced food in the Lewiston area, widely available where people can access it. So the goal, obstacle, and solution are there to just give you a framing for you to then dive in as deep as you want on what those specific examples could be for your actual organization. And this is where we get to that this is going to look different for everybody. But the collective piece is that that Shane at FS&E is also talking about using public spaces to be able to have access to healthy and local foods as well, so that the audience that's hitting that is getting that. And then when they're interacting with your audience, sharing with your messaging, they're getting even a step further, that in Lewiston, that looks like access to the farmers market in this public space. So there's so many layers here to try to fold into an hour-and-a-half presentation. But the point of me trying to, I guess, ground us in this skill building is that the collective narratives that we see, people put out these resources all the time, right? They're saying, say this, don't say this. Wouldn't it be great if we were all striving towards ending hunger, right? I know Maine even has like ending hunger by 2030 initiative. And while we all agree with those, I think oftentimes what ends up happening is that we get overshadowed by those very real needs of meeting the demands of like getting people to show up, of getting people to interact, engage with like our certain messaging. But what I'm trying to say is that we can also continue to fold in those larger pieces that often are the first thing to fall off when we're rushing through our day and when we're trying to just create things to put it out the door. So the fact that you're sitting here thinking about it is just going to continue to lead you to be thinking like, oh, right, my narrative here is public space for public good. We need the local residents to be able to have access to it. We need our farmers to have access to this public space. And part of that is going to be implied, part of that is going to be explicit, but that's the collective narrative that you're lifting up, which I imagine is also being lifted up by many of the others on this call at the same time.
So I have a follow-up question that's really helpful. So in the goal of the like collective narrative building are we, from your perspective in this work, because I saw what you did and I really like it, is to try to be linking to distilling our goals and messaging to be linking up with others within where it makes sense in the food system or in our movement, for example, so that those messages like really rise to the top and resonate and were echo. Because like, yeah, you took it and you distilled it really well, public space for public good. And that looks different across different activities. But if that's a kind of the meta message or the underlying message, and the more we can link up, the more that then it strengthens other goals within a particular movement, if that makes sense. And so I'm just trying to understand the collective nature of the narrative building, if I get it. Because like I'm thinking collective within my own city or region, but like you've brought it to a place of like collective across those of us working in not just food system, but public health work, right? And so that's
Right.
what I'm trying to get to in your interpretation.
Harriet, I see you are off mute. Did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I just wanted to come back to what you said earlier, Sherry, of, that we're all saturated by communications, and that's why this is so important, right? Because if we start to hear in like the daily inundation, this similarity of messaging across different organizations, across different types of groups working in or around sort of food system work, if you hear that same sort of messaging again and again, it's going to start to sink in and it's going to sort of break through the noise.
Yeah, and Sherry, you have this really wonderful ability to preview exactly what I'm going to be going into next. So I wish we had more time. I'm recognizing we have 17 minutes. So I'm going to touch on this collectiveness, right? The whole point was this seeing this skill, taking a narrative, filtering it through your own goals, and creating a message that in part is individual and is in part collective. Now, what I want you all to do just real quick mentally is I want you to kind of make a quick list in your brain, or just think of how long a list of your brain is of who you collaborate with on program, right? Dozens of people, dozens of organizations, right? Like, does that sound like about right? Like you could keep listing on a list, there's spreadsheets. Now I want you to take a second and think, how many people and who do you collaborate with specifically on communication? Is there anybody? One, maybe two partners that you like have a campaign that you did in September of 2021 and it was really great? Does that fit the vibe? And call me if I'm wrong. And I'm not, I want to be wrong, but not that many, right? So my question is, why is the one list longer than the other? I think we're all here because we understand that communications is 50% at the very least of all the work that we have to do. Culture change is what is going to be needed in order for us to accomplish any of our programming. And we have these lovely, beautiful mission statements, but we don't always apply them to our work with communications because communications can be seen as like a post box, right? We need to go, here's the input and there's the output, put it out over our socials and our newsletter and what have you. And we need to call that a day and we need to move on to the next thing. But Sherry, to your point, one of the things that I think we need to be working on as a movement, as a group, is this idea of strategic collective communications. And strategic collective communications is this framework grounded in solidarity with other fellow communicators. It really asks us to approach communication through collaboration and to build collective knowledges and practices and strategies and strategic collective narratives with our partners that will then inform our individualized communication goals. By no means am I saying that this is going to usurp all that we do. I'm not saying that strategic collective communications is going to, or our narratives are going to inform all of our messaging, but this is a step towards starting to work together to communicate collectively to what Harriet said, so that we have all of these messages pinging off of each other and your audience is interacting with my messaging in a way that's going to be able to resonate and vice versa. And while I know we all embrace this idea of collectivism in our work in some capacity, I mean, we're all in this presentation right now. We're all here at this conference. I'm saying we need to move more than just slotting ideas in where they fit and really take a wholesale shift in how we view the function of communications and the goals that we pursue. Oh. So what is strategic collective communications in practice, right? This looks like a strategic collective narrative. This looks like communal framing, and this looks like solidarity. A strategic collective narrative, as we talked about, is we know that our partners and collaborators are using similar narratives out there. And in pursuing a strategic collective narrative, we're asking us to abandon that assumption that other folks are using similar narratives and come together to identify them, to organize around them. Again, this won't be exhaustive, and this won't be saying that we're not utilizing other narratives, but we're coming together to say, these are a shared interpretation of the world that I am going to use when and where I can, because I know that others are going to be using it too, and that our collective power is going to be bigger. And communal framing asks us to nest our outreach to our audiences and our specific call to actions in these greater strategic collective narratives when and where we can, for us to organize around them. So in turn, even while we're producing these individualized messages as we got to today, by doing this work collectively, we're continuing to build community, and we're continuing to learn from one another about the best ways to reach a variety of audiences, and trusting that we don't need to reach every audience to accomplish our goals because others are also doing that. And then solidarity, right? It's defined as unity or agreement or feeling of action, especially among individuals with a common interest, mutual support with a group. So not only do most of us not have the resources to blanket the airwaves with our messaging, we're not Coca-Cola, right? We're not Tide, we're not whatever, huge corporations with billions of dollars in assets. But what we do have are these really strong, beautiful community connections and these networks that we foster, and a legitimacy that can never be given and never is afforded to those type of corporations that are in our communities. So in practice, this doesn't just look like organizing around strategic collective narratives or doing communal framing, even though those are integral. Practicing solidarity and communications also looks like potentially following the rule of thirds, right? Lifting up a third your own content, a third of your partner's content, and a third of just cool stuff that relates to the things that you want to communicate. Not just saying I, me. And this could also look like potentially pursuing shared metrics at some point. But again, this is all based in coming together collectively to talk and to figure out where everybody is in this realm of communications so that we can, again, work together to lift up common threads so that we aren't all trying to beat the saturation or beat the machine by ourselves. We do this programmatically, and it's far past time that we start to do this a little bit more through our communications as well. Now, what does this look like to operationalize, right? It looks like shifting understanding of our communications work internally. That's talking to our executive directors, or if you are an ED or a boss, thinking about comms a little bit differently. That's committing to working with one another frequently and consistently. And it's actively inviting people into collective spaces while making sure that we're remaining adaptable to all needs and experiences as well. And how does this look day to day? And I'm going to throw this over to Darcy because this is Darcy's example up here, who has been working on embodying and embracing this through her own work, along with a group of communicators throughout New England. So Darcy, would you like to talk a little bit how this looks?
Sure. Yeah. So, like Shane said, I and also Harriet, who's in this group, have been working along with Shane and some communicators from other organizations throughout New England, talking about like how can we lift up different themes together? How can we support each other's work? How can we like share this this huge lift of communication? So I just pulled out one example from the Instagram that I am responsible for the network of food councils. And this is really kind of, I like this example because it brings in a few of the narratives that we like as a communications collective have been talking about. And couches them really nicely into a goal that I have for myself and for our network, which is to be a little more engaged, to start engaging more with food policy in the state, like as a whole, as a network. So you can see like this was from like last like October as we were getting towards elections. So elections are November 8th. Do you know where your local candidates stand on issues affecting farms, fisheries, and workers? So the call to action is, talk to your candidates, ask them, hold them accountable for this, let them know that these are things that are of value to us. And then it talks about like the next slide, and this would be a carousel that you'd scroll through on Instagram. The next slide talks about how we can increase local food production in our state. The next slide talks about how do we make sure that the workers that are growing this food and bringing it to market or serving it in our restaurants and our grocery stores are getting paid a fair wage. and then it talks about PFAS. So all these major issues that our group and multiple other groups in the state are working on are like baked into this one carousel. And it's sort of like it's addressing these multiple narratives all in kind of like a tight collected way that says, these are our values. We know these are values that we all share. So let's make sure that the people who want to be making decisions for us know that these are our values and hopefully share these values as well.
Thanks, Darcy. And again, this can be subtle too, right? This isn't hitting them over the head with this like narrative of like, are you doing this? If you don't, blah, blah, blah. It's saying, hey, y'all, ask your folks. It's pushing this narrative that this is important to our community. So there's so many iterations to this, but the most important part, again, is continuing to develop the skills together to be able to lift up narratives that we identify collectively, but also, again, coming together, right? We have to continue to work together in the realm of comms and in the realm of narrative and storytelling so that we can rest assured that our partners out there are lifting up similar things and that we don't have to do it all. And I know we can't, but I know I feel much better knowing I have other partners out there that are doing similar stuff. So to that point, I invite you all, first off, before we open this up, to join the Northeast Food System Communicators Community of Practice. And I'm putting the links in the chat. And this is a place where some folks come together, they share resources, they ask questions, and it's a place where we're starting to organize. And I want to lift up the mural of the Maine Food Convergence, because this is a place, if this is important to you all, to put that there. Sherry, to your point, Lewiston is different than Maine, than different than New England, and different than the world, right? And the rest of the nation. So maybe there is a contingent where folks want to talk about this for very Maine specific narrative. And this doesn't have to encompass all of your work by any means. That's not what I'm advocating for. I'm advocating for just a shift in our perspectives in communicating and to, again, start taking that skill set of creating framing based off of narrative and starting to apply it collectively. I did this presentation in an hour the last time, and this is how much time I had left to open up the floor. So I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm going to attribute this to all your wonderful communication and sharing. And I would just love to hear any gut checks, feedback on the skill portion, or anything that you're thinking leaving today after this. And yeah, I'm just going to open up the floor with me saying thank you as well for being here, and to Darcy for all her wonderful examples.
Yeah, it was super great. I found it great. I found I'm leaving changed. I think like just changed and inspired, and I'm appreciate the resources and how to approach this. Yeah. And if I was anticipating things, I've done workshops and I've done I think you did a great job.
Sure.
No, I'm not coming as an authority on that at all.
I'll take your authority.
Which is, I know how hard it is.
I'm putting that on my LinkedIn and my resume.
No, I know how hard it is what I'm getting at. And like, you had like a really great balance and how you facilitated it. And I found that in lieu of a feedback form, that's what I'm telling you.
And for real, y'all, this is an iterative process. If you have feedback on like how this maybe would have better resonated in the skill building section too, I feel like that is something, I mean, it's not even I feel, that is something I want to hear. If you have thoughts, and please again, join the Food System Communicator COP. Join us. We have monthly food comms cafes where communicators from around the region come together and talk. We're working to expand this idea of the strategic collective narrative work. So that'll be something coming down the pike in a little bit of time. And talk among your peers and your colleagues and just share. I think that's the last thing I would leave you with is just share. Don't be afraid to lift others up, because I know that my success is going to be your success and vice versa. And we have to shift away from this capitalistic idea that we have to carve our own little piece out of the world, because we can't do this alone.
Shane, I just want to say thank you for sharing the resources, and also this, I found this presentation to be really great. And I'm leaving here with a greater sense of ease, just knowing that there are people thinking about this and framing these narratives in ways that are helpful for anyone who has to touch this communication. Just because I know personally, when I'm putting together messaging, sometimes I have a sense of anxiety about, like, I have a very specific use case here, and I'm worried that I'm doing it in a bit of a silo and missing things, and just kind of knowing that there is this kind of movement that is letting us rely on the community and find these collaborative messages, just gives me a sense of great ease that, you know, like, I can focus on my small part and know that I'm doing it within this collective, and it will resonate hopefully the way that it needs to, without contradicting or you don't have to be in charge of the whole thing project. So really appreciate it.
Definitely.
So Becca put the Zoom link for the big Zoom room in the chat. Thank you, Becca. Gonna hop back in there and see you all in there. Thank you so much. Thank you, Shane.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.